Welcome to Novelist Spotlight. This is Mike Consol, your host. Two quick things before introducing you to my guest. First, I encourage you to subscribe to this podcast by clicking on the follow button and also clicking on the bell icon so you are alerted to each new edition of the program. Second, in addition to being the producer of this podcast and interviewing novelists, I am a novelist myself. I've written 4 books, 3 novels, and 1 short story collection. In the episode notes, you will find a short link to my Amazon page and all 4 of those titles. Now, on with our program. In the spotlight is Nathaniel Popkin, author of the new novel Partly Strong, Partly Broken. Set in suburban New Jersey during the fall of 2023 and told through the eyes of a passionate, inclusivity-minded rabbi, the novel unfolds in the shadow of Hamas's gruesome attack on Israel on October 7, 2023, and Israel's subsequent devastation of Gaza. Partly Strong, Partly Broken is Nathaniel Popkin's 4th novel and his 8th book. He is also a writer and producer of history documentary films, the co-founder of the website and public history and journalism project Hidden City, and formerly a writer of criticism for the Wall Street Journal, Kenyon Review, Public Books, and Cleaver Magazine, among other publications. His work has also appeared in the New York Times. Nathaniel Popkin, welcome to the program.
Hey, Mike, it's great to be here with you.
Let me ask you, you start off on a novel. Did October 7, 2023 happen in the middle of the writing process and it redirected you, or was it after that that you decided to write this book?
That's a great question. Actually, it was done. So in September of 2023, I was busy sending the novel out to readers, to editors and the like, to see what kind of response I would get. And then October 7th happened. And literally in that moment, I mean, it's a small thing to disrupt the creative act of writing a novel, but it, of course, forced me to start over. Completely start over. And at first, I didn't really know what to do.
Well, let me ask you before you
yeah.
go on. The original iteration of the book was how different from your new from the one you actually completed? Or I guess you completed the original iteration, but you revised it. How similar are the two iterations?
Well, it's really interesting because, now I would advise anyone to do this, which is write something, finish it, be happy with it, and then tear it up. Because a lot of refining and a lot of deepening happens in that process. So the original novel was called The Kingdom Shall Be Partly Strong and Partly Broken, which is a direct quote from the book of Daniel in the Old Testament. Shortened eventually, but the bigger difference is the tone. And as the novel involves a community, a congregation called Temple Beth Israel, and a multi-faith and secular community that exists around it that Rabbi Dina is very much involved in. And in the first version, it was sort of a big cast of characters and a little decentralized in the storytelling. And as I eventually figured out how I wanted to rewrite the novel, Rabbi Dina took over more space and really became the person that she is in the novel. And she occupied a space of more melancholy, more tragedy, and more love. I learned in the rewriting that she was a really giving person. She was always giving gifts to everyone in the previous version, and then as I start to rewrite, and I'm seeing her give these gifts out, and I'm realizing, oh, she's a really giving person. And what happened is that the most important things stuck. The stuff that couldn't work anymore. For example, the first version was more satirical. The tone was lighter. And that was no longer possible once such profound tragedy and war, destruction, violence, death, intentional targeting of people, all this happening It was no longer possible to have a satirical tone.
I agree with you completely that the whole idea of finish your book and tear it up. I've never done that, but I have lost files. I mean, lost a chapter or a
Mhm.
section, and I felt really disappointed. But what I realized is when I wrote it again, a second iteration of it, it came out better. It was what was the phrase you used? You said a deeper.
It what did I say? I certainly said that the characters and the situations that they find themselves in and what it is they're really trying to be and do and how they exist in the world becomes more real and their realities much more deeper. Their personalities have time. The transition from the first version to the second version for me was difficult because after the war started, I really didn't know what to do. The idea of the novel was to say, hey, these fractures and these fissures and these divisions have been developing within Jewish communities and in American life, our communities have become very fractured by politics. And these things have been going on for a long time in American Jewish communities that um, the fact of Israel, its government, its government's policies, and the way it handles itself in regard to Palestine, the Palestinians, the West Bank, and Gaza has absolutely fractured American Jewish communities. And that has been happening for a really long time. So I was merely using fiction to make this real to people, something that a lot of people had would not talk about, namely most rabbis in America. And so I wrote it with the idea of sort of transforming that reality into fiction so that it could be seen and consumed and discussed and thought about. And but then October 7th happened, and that even, obviously that reality of the fissuring and the fracturing and the the polarization just continued in multiple times the amount of force right away. And a lot of people became very, very protective of their beliefs. And they couldn't imagine listening to someone else's ideas or thoughts on the situation. And so there was intense polarization, and people sort of became not themselves in that period. People became cartoon versions of themselves to some degree where they really became so aligned and so connected their to a particular belief that did not necessarily accord with reality, and it became harder and harder to have conversations. So I couldn't portray that you can't turn cartoons into literature. And that I really struggled with. So that was what led me ultimately when I did figure out, I talked to a lot of writer friends and mentors and people that could, my wife, who really, understood what I was trying to do, really, thought through how I should rewrite it. And that's where the idea of ending the novel as the news starts to come in about about the Hamas attack on Israel. That's where it ends. And that might be dissatisfying to some people, but that um, creates a lot of dramatic tension and a dramatic irony for the reader who knows exactly what's going to happen, but the characters don't. And that for me helped me create a novel that could be a page turner that a reader could really invest in because the emotional reality of it is so powerful and so um, real and so hard to manage in our own lives that the novel becomes a bit of catharsis.
So transport yourself back in time to October 7, 2023. The world is shocked not only by the attack, but the the viciousness of it, the killing that went on, the decapitation of babies and so on.
Mhm.
Um, what, how, talk about that day. You were watching the news, you heard all the reporting come in. At that point, how long did it take you to really get a grip on what had happened? And how long did it take you to decide, I need to rewrite this book to be more reflective of this event in history?
It was immediate. I mean, I I knew that such a um, attack, type of attack, the brutality of it, the ways in which it punctured certain um, beliefs held by Israelis, the way it disrupted in particular ways, the hostage taking of families and older people and liberal people, the effect, the targeting of a liberal kibbutz, which was filled with peacemaking people, um, the attack on the rave, um,
Hmm.
and these were very well thought out. It was intended to do something, and I understood it right away. I don't pretend to understand Israeli society. This is a book about America and American communities. Um, but I did know that nothing would ever be the same. And I also knew, based upon past experience and what we've all come to learn about the way the Israeli government has handled attacks that come from Hezbollah or Hamas or Palestinians, they will disproportionately respond. And I knew that the response would would be beyond the pale as it was. I was not at all surprised by what transpired over the course of the rest of 2023 into 2024 into 2025, practically to the present. Um, None of that surprised me in the least.
Mm. Now, John Irving, the novelist John Irving, says, I write my last sentence and I start with my last sentence. And then that's
Mhm.
my target. And I write to that. In a sense, you did that because you knew what your last scene was going to be, or your last chapter, perhaps. So I take it that because you knew your target and where you were leading the reader to, that you changed or everything that you wrote prior to that, prior to the reader reaching that point, was preparation for that. True?
Totally. Well, it organized everything. And it's absolutely true. I knew where the thing was going to land in the end. I write oppositely, though, that the most important thing to me is the first sentence and the first paragraph. So that's where everything begins. That's where the tone, the prose style, the pacing, that's where you take the reader's hand and say, "Come with me, trust me for a minute." And I put a lot of work into getting that right.
Mm.
Um, but it absolutely, the decision that I made was to set the novel. Basically, it starts on the day after Labor Day, 2023. Rabbi Adina, it starts with her in the airport van in Israel. She's been there for 3 weeks. She has colleagues and friends there. She studied there. And when she was studying there as a much younger woman, she had a very real and significant love story um, with a Palestinian Israeli woman, Sana. And she actually stayed with Sana, who had since married, had a baby, divorced, and was living on her own as a single mother in Haifa. And the rabbi stayed with them for a short amount of time with Sana's daughter, had gone to the anti-government protests, which had been going on all that summer. And we sort of forget about that and the power of those
Hmm.
protests. And then she arrives back on the 4th of September, and she arrives back to her synagogue to find out little by little that a whole lot of things are falling apart. And she's a somewhat willful person. She's empathetic and kind and generous with herself and true to her passions, but she's also willful. And I think in fiction we know where our ego takes us. And so she's that, she's living with that reality as the days go by. And basically, in the course of that month, it's the high holidays, she has to conduct Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, um, sh- and 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 these things are the most significant moments in the the year of a rabbi. And so she's got these significant things, but even almost equally as important, she comes when she arrives back bearing gifts for hamsas for some young people, spices that she bought in various markets for some of her colleagues, especially her colleague Imam Abdul, who's a co-leader of the multi-faith coalition that she leads um, in the community, in the wider community. And she realizes that a hurricane has come through and blown a hole in the roof of her study. She learns that um, Fami, who is a young woman who had been a Syrian refugee when she was a teenager, and that the synagogue helped resettle her some years before. Fami had been the victim of a hate crime on Labor Day at a party, and um, And so Rabbi has to figure out how to apply herself to this very serious situation of a beloved person who's not part of her congregation, but is part of what she believes is the purpose of her community, is in dire straits. So these are some of the things that she faces as the high holidays are beginning.
Hmm. Now, you mentioned that the title of the book, your first take on the book, your first iteration was partly strong, partly broken, correct?
The first iteration was the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly broken. And that was just
Ah,
a direct quote from a translation from the Hebrew or the Aramaic of the book of Daniel. And you know what happens when all things get refined, all characters, there are some, there are some characters in the novel who could have led to sort of trope or being types. And perhaps in the first version, they sort of stood as types and they became very real as I rewrote this. And that is one of the great things about a revision such as this is that perhaps you've been a little lazy as a writer in characterizing some of the people who make up the story, and you have a chance, or the characters themselves tell you, "Hey, I want to be a real human being, and I'm not going to just be a type for you." And that's what happened here. So all things got refined, including the title, which got shortened, I think, uh, in a good way.
no, did you shorten the title and you just figured would that portion of the title work for this book? Did the publishing company say we want we want to shorten it and just use partly strong, partly broken? How'd that play out?
That's a great question, and I'm not sure I remember the answer. I think I did it perhaps with my editor. This book, this novel is really the result of a tremendous partnership with a friend and an editor, Anne DeForest, who this is the second book of mine she's edited. And I couldn't have had a more skilled hand going through multiple versions of this second version. Um, I think I decided to shorten the title. It just I start to see it on the cover. I start to see what it would look like as a finished novel, and that told me that was going to be the title.
Hmm.
The other title was too long.
Now, you also have a subtitle. It says An American Community on Edge. Did explain I mean, in one sense, it doesn't require any explanation, the idea of being a Jewish American being setting a person on edge. On the other hand, your experience is, of course, unique to you. How would you describe that statement, an American community on edge?
Absolutely. Well, it's not really the subtitle, but I guess it was used as the log line, or is
Oh,
used as the
that's
log
right.
line
Yeah.
in
Subtitle's
the.
just a novel, right?
Yeah, right. Subtitle is just a novel. But An American Community on Edge was meant to do a couple to say a couple things about what's happening here. Is A, this is an American. This is suburban New Jersey. This is a Jewish synagogue congregation, but that is fully integrated and embedded into a wider, very diverse um, piece of America. There's a high presence. First of all, the rabbi is part of this multi-faith coalition, which is made up of clerical leaders that are Catholic and Presbyterian and AME and Hindu. Um, and there's another rabbi. There's a Unitarian minister. There's the typical group of clerics who come together and say, we believe in what we're teaching here and we want to come together to make the community more just. And they had started to do that at the start of the first Trump administration, and and then they had stayed together. But we all know the ways in which Israel and Gaza and Palestine and the war have divided even the strongest of alliances. And I think it's up to the reader to think about what happens next here. So it's an American community on edge. You have the synagogue itself stands across the street from a park created out of a Revolutionary War site that has a cannon from the Revolutionary War in it. So there's this like sense of, how integrated, how assimilated, how American are Jews? Have they come to be? What does it mean to be an American Jew in relationship to being American? What's the difference? Um, it's a porous situation, as I described the situation with the Syrian refugee Fahmy. She has a relationship with that synagogue. She has a relationship with Imam Abdul and his mosque. She is part of the community in multiple and complicated ways. Her mother is. So, what happens to her matters to a lot of people. She she carries an enormous sort of moral weight in the story. There's another thing that's happening here is that you know, we think of America as a kind of victorious nation, but we're seeing now the ways in which um, we have, there are these weaknesses, right? And there are these fissures that have been developing and developing. So really all of America is on edge right now. And this is the story of that.
Hmm. True, true. So, how political are you, Nathaniel, and how religious are you?
Well, a friend and novelist, well known and well regarded novelist, when he read the final version of this, he said, "Who could have imagined that the least spiritual person I know could write such a spiritual novel?" And that is to say, I don't really. I was raised Jewish in a Jewish family. Um, I was bar mitzvahed a million years ago, but I've never quite identified that way, and I've never practiced, in a way in which um, being religious matters at all. I'm not a religious person. I have spiritual beliefs that are more linked to, the kinds of things many of us think about, like earth and nature and time and things like that. So
Great White
I'm not,
Spirit, kind of Native
yeah,
American almost.
yeah. I mean, it's just, I'm much more attached to things having to do with the life of the earth than than s- than than attachment or identity. I've always resisted the identity aspect of it, I guess foremost. But I also realized that this is not the first book of mine that carries Jewish themes, and so something has been slowly brewing inside of me, and I work it out on the page, I guess. Um, I'm a pretty political person, and I probably have pretty strongly held political beliefs, which I recognize as beliefs, right? They're not truths. They're attachments. And,
And have they
we're
changed
all,
over time? Have they changed over time?
uh,
Because that's a big issue today in certainly the United States. A lot of people just
Mhm.
will not change their minds about anything. Um, did you, as you look back over
Yeah.
your political history, do you feel that you've changed? Not necessarily, not even necessarily to, yeah, at least in a nuanced way, or do you feel like your beliefs are pretty fixed politically?
I really do believe that I see my beliefs as beliefs and I'm not a fundamentalist about anything. I don't believe there's ever one truth. I believe that each of us has truths about who we are and what is brewing deep inside us. There's truths about each of us that we can each then relate to each other with. And that is the beauty and the hope for bridges because we can see ourselves in each other. But I've never been a fundamentalist and about anything. Uh, I think, with age, and this is a typical experience, I imagine. I've certainly seen myself become both much less strident and therefore more open and more pragmatic, absolutely more pragmatic
Hmm.
um, about politics and about society and about what you need to do to manage and run an earth of 8 billion people, a country of 350 million, in a, an economy, like you really learn that things have to be managed. And, that has been an evolution for me. But I certainly also retain, um, some strong feelings about how and why and who got our country, our beloved democracy, into the state that it's in today, where on the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, we might be using some of the words in that document to apply to our current situation. And I study history pretty carefully. Um, so I would say it's long answer. I'm way more, I'm less ideological and but I'm also feeling a deep sense of sadness for the things that we have lost in the last 10 years. And I'm particularly sad for the ways that the ideals that structure the best ideals that we've been working towards and that so many people have struggled so hard for and died for, many of them in this country, those ideals have been shunted aside, shoved aside in the last 10 years, and that is the most upsetting thing to have to admit.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah.
Let me ask you about the late great Philip Roth. He
Mhm.
said, he used to bridle at the idea that he was a Jewish writer. He said, "I'm an American writer who happens to be a Jew." Can you relate to that?
I absolutely do relate to it. I'm an American writer, and being Jewish is part of my identity. As you can see, I also am attached to my country and what it might mean, My grandfather, for whom I was named, came over on a boat that landed about a 12-minute walk to the house I live in today in 1901. and that's a mythic story of our country. Um, that I suppose I'm a little too attached to. And so I agree with Philip Roth in that way. And I grew up not dissimilarly from him in except he's was a generation older or a generation and a half maybe, and he really rebelled. His generation really rebelled against the generation before him, which is my uh, grandparents and great grandparents' generation, who were more religious, more orthodox, more closed, more separatist. And his generation, which is the generation approximately of my parents, said, no way, we don't want that. We don't want to be Orthodox. We want to be assimilated. We want to be modern Americans, just like everybody else. I think World War II was a big push in that direction. But and I sort of inherited that from my own parents. That sort of, my mother is the least religious person I know, except that she could tell you everyone she sees who's a Jew and who's not a Jew. This is like this sort of dichotomy within us. So I agree with Roth. I'm an American writer. I'm a human writer. I mean, I read more fiction in translation than I read American fiction, and that's just my own tastes, I guess. That's nothing to say about our great writers. Um, and, I'm a human writer. How about that?
Hmm. Hmm. Um, how has your writing changed as you've gotten older, Nathaniel? What kind of changes have you seen in your writing? I mean, obviously, you become a better writer. I mean, we all do with time and practice, but how has the writing changed beyond just advancing in terms of skill level?
Oh my goodness. It's such a voyage. I am not an MFA kid, um, person. I'm a writer that taught himself to write through journalism and will a practice. And I have always said that at each step of the way, along the way, my first book was a work of nonfiction that came out in 2002. It was very literary, but it was nonfiction. Then I decided I could write a novel, which was totally absurd and wrong. I had to learn. But I have always described that each step along the way, including all the way through the very last moments of the last revisions of Partly Strong, Partly Broken, which is my eighth book. And there's a ninth book that I've co-edited. So this is a long career.
Hmm.
Each step of the way for me is a step through a doorway where I thought I understood, and then I stepped through the doorway and I was like, oh, now I get it. Now I understand what it really means to show and not tell. Oh, that's an easy one. Okay. What it means to like express almost everything through action. I didn't understand that. What it means to really manage the point of view in a scene that's a complicated scene with a lot of people in it. Um, I certainly have learned how dialogue can work. I've experimented with different forms. My first novel was half of it told in alternating first person. Third novel was all alternating first person among about 11 characters. That's a form that I adore. Uh, I tend to keep trying out different things. I think maybe there's still a voice in there that's still mine, that's right from the beginning. But man, I'm still learning. And Mike, it's the curse and the beauty of this work, which is you never master it, you never master it. And isn't that amazing? Because like that means till the day you die, you can always be trying to perfect what you're doing.
Yeah, and you never get too old to be good at it or even better at it. I mean, short of losing your mind.
Yep.
So there's that. I mean, Philip Roth, bringing him up again was a great example. He wrote some of his best stuff in his 80s. He just hit a really creative streak there where he did amazing things. Let me ask you about, there's so many aspects to writing, as you know, Nathaniel. There's scene setting, there's character development, there's dialogue, there's, I'm not going to
Pacing.
think of,
Yeah.
there you go, pacing critical.
Yep.
What is your, if you were to identify one aspect of your writing that you think is kind of your superpower or your strongest, the strongest element to your game, what would that be?
I used to be a really descriptive writer, and I laid into my ability to bring a scene alive or a place or a circumstance alive for the reader. And when I learned that you couldn't live in description, I was able to carry forth the sense of things into, sort of as I revised my approach, as I simplified perhaps my sentence structure, as I learned to describe things through action in a more dynamic way instead of as a more set aside way. Um, I still retain that capacity to um, make you feel what's at stake in any moment. Um, and it's taken a lot of work. I've tried all kinds of different approaches to um, integrating history, for example. Uh, there's a way in which there's a way in which I see the world I see the world in layers. You can look outside and you can see a landscape, whether it's an urban landscape or a not urban landscape, and you can see the layers of intervention, the human hand in it, multiple times, multiple generations, multiple epochs, all of that. And I really have tried to bring that sense that the reality that we live in the moment, or that the characters are occupying in any given moment, is an accumulation of time. I don't know if I do it successfully, but when, we all live in a space of accumulation of time. And that's a powerful thing. I think it's a very emotional thing that we carry with us, and it pulls us in different directions. My hope is to make that real on the page. Is it successful? I don't really know.
For others to decide.
For others to
Um,
decide. Yeah.
Now, the book, check me on this, but the book covers a 1 month period of time leading up to October 7. So it's a very contained time period. Now, the book is 200, roughly 250 pages. So it's not like a sprawl. It was not like 800 pages and it covers only a month of time. What was it like writing to just a 30-day period of time? Was it liberating at all? Was it constraining? I mean, how did that work for you?
It was both liberating and constraining, right? Because I was freed from having to figure out a whole lot of other stuff. And in terms of pacing, the pacing was implicit. So um, that took that made my life easier, and it made my life more difficult because I had to um, align the story to the Jewish liturgical calendar in the most important time of the year. And that means the Torah readings of each week, the minutia of each holiday through from Yom Kippur, from Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur to Sukkot, um, and getting all of that right. I had to keep a liturgical Torah calendar next in a tab always open on my computer as I wrote to make sure that all of that was organized properly. But this is something I taught myself to do a long time ago. My first novel, Lion and Leopard, takes place in the 18 teens, about from 1810 to 1820. And many of the characters are real, real historical characters. And I had to sort of put their lives onto like a clothesline, a timeline like that. So I learned how to use an external timeline and then fit a story into it while also making that feel authentic and real. And that was the challenge here. It was both a blessing and a curse. And but it really did help me um, pace it and also pace the emotional arcs of each of the characters.
Hmm. You were quite complimentary of your editor. Talk about working with your editor. A lot of people are very touchy about a lot of writers are very touchy about their prose. They feel like they're sacrosanct. I don't want to change anything. And this is I mean, because of the nature of what you wrote, I can see you feeling particularly proprietary about each and every word and maybe even each and every punctuation. Talk about what the process was like and what maybe she opened your eyes about or what she kind of provoked change regarding within the copy or the storyline.
Yeah, I mean, I'm blessed by working with someone who understands me, who cares a lot about the work that I do. And there's a mutual trust. So, I mean, I could count on her to read in a way that I knew would not be threatening to what I thought was, an amazing story, right? 'Cause the thing about being a writer, and this is why people become so attached to their prose, is that you have to take yourself so seriously in order to even write a sentence or a paragraph or God knows a story or a novel. You really have to invest yourself in it. And that means taking yourself seriously in a world that really doesn't care all that much about books. So that's a challenge. And the thing about Anne, my editor, is that she's got a better eye for things than I do. And I mean, we all do when we're reading someone else's work. I've edited other people's novels, and it has helped them immeasurably because you're bringing this external thing. So you're able to see where a character is a type and not a real breathing human being. You're able to see how certain things have to be planted in the story in order to come to fruition later on. Um, we worked so well together that by the end of the revision, we realized that a couple chapters were needed. I write from the first paragraph, but lo and behold, we needed a new first chapter to go before the original first chapter. And the level of trust and understanding among myself, my editor, and the publisher, Doug Gordon, was so high that I could write that first chapter rather quickly, and it needed very little editing. We needed another chapter between the novel contains a coming of age story of two high school seniors um, who are the rabbi's favorite students, and each of those two people, they have a very fraught and complex relationship between the two of them, Celia and Theo. We needed another scene with the two of them, a little bit more than halfway through the novel. And with that prompt from my editor, I was able to conceive of that scene, place it somewhere that made sense physically within the world of the novel, and have its emotional trajectory be so powerful that actually the other day when I did an event, um, I was asked to read that chapter. And I just wrote it, and it needed no editing because so much had been understood between us. And I think I'm really lucky that I have I have this person. I have a community of writers around me in a writing group. I have my wife and my daughter and my son and others who read my work and friends. And all of that is absolutely necessary to be a writer. You gotta let go. You gotta let
Yes.
go.
That's the hardest thing to do for some
It is.
writers.
Yep.
I heard you say in an interview, we're all part of a bigger consciousness, which falls in the line with your universalist, great white spirit sort of ethos. Did you ever feel that you had tapped into that consciousness during the writing process? Some people talk about a muse, or they talk about, I felt like I was just typing and reading things on the page. Now, that's a rare thing, but this was a very heartfelt project for you. And I'm just wondering whether you ever felt like you had tapped into something higher during the process of writing.
Oh God. Absolutely. And in multiple ways. So, you know, there's a consciousness that actually the purpose of this novel is to concretize that consciousness. That is um, a a conflicted consciousness that exists among Jewish Americans and more generally Americans around Israel and Palestine. And that wasn't being, since October 7th, it's been exposed. And there have been even long form journalism stories about synagogues that are rupturing with tensions boiling over, that kind of thing. But I tapped, to write this novel, I was just tapping into something that was way beyond me, that I was just able to access somehow. Not because I attend synagogue or anything like that, but I was able to access it. And then in the writing, I firmly believe that yes, we who claim to be artists are artists. Yes, we have our own individual vision, desire, motivation, obsessions that are so important in the writing process. Yes, absolutely true. But my God, when we're writing, we are in conversation with all the all of time in the written word, sorry. And that means that we're engaging in a conversation that's way beyond us. And that is a grand consciousness. And so 2 novels ago, my second novel is called Everything is Borrowed. And I meant that. I meant that in a meta way in the story of that novel, but I mean that for the creative process. Everything is borrowed. And when you're sitting there writing and you're lucky enough to be able to quiet yourself to so that you can borrow, and I don't mean rob or steal, I mean expose oneself to in a way that you can access things. There's so much serendipity that happens on the page, and all of a sudden, a character's humiliation comes to mean something in the theme of the novel, and it comes to mean something structurally in the plot, and things happen in a way that feel like they're happening for a reason on the page, and you're like, holy crap. There is so much serendipity in writing fiction, particularly, that I have found. But I think it's when you are finally able to quiet yourself, that's that's when it happens. Um, yeah, I had another thought to add to that, and now I've lost access to it for the second. But see if I come up with it.
You know, I visited with the writing coach who called writing an act of faith, which I really feel, I mean, it resonated with me because so often we start to write and we end up with something that we think is just unmanageable or is just trash. But if you really kind of have to maintain that faith that if I just keep chiseling away at this, adding, subtracting, being additive, being subtractive, and so on, it resolves itself. All of a sudden, it starts to take shape, almost like sculpting. And but that's also something that I suspect you might relate to, just this kind of act of faith with writing. It's almost like a spiritual practice in some ways.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's sort of what I was saying by having to take oneself seriously, which is not a, no one wants to be around someone who takes themselves too seriously, but you have to believe in what you're doing enough to be willing to chisel away and to be willing to chisel the wrong thing off and then put it back on if it if you erred or vice versa. And to be willing to have the discipline to stay with it, to know that you can get better. Writing is a gift, maybe a talent, a skill, a craft, a profession, a practice. I think all these things are true all at once, and and everyone works differently. I mean, there are many, many stories of writers who, over the eras who have finished a manuscript, sent it in, and boom, there it is, right? And maybe when you were typewriting or handwriting something, the discipline was more built in to the process. Um, but boy, when you're revising, you're becoming more precise in your thinking because writing is thinking. And when you're revising, you're getting more precise about what the story is, what it's about, what is it really about? Who are the characters really? What do they really want? What are they trying to do? What's standing in their way? What are the conflicts that matter here? All of these things become more precise. The more precise you get, the more universal, of course, the story will feel to the reader. Because you can never write generalities. You have to write real things and give the reader a chance to connect to that precise circumstance, to that precise motivation or terror or obstacle or fear, whatever it is that's working its way at that's eating its way at the characters. I remembered what I was going to say when I finally decided how I was going to rewrite this. I realized that this is a novel, Partly Strong, Partly Broken, is a novel of a turning point. And the turning point is the 100-year-plus allegiance between American Jews and Israel. That is changing. That automatic allegiance among many, I would say the majority of American Jews throughout, well before the State of Israel was created, the idea of creating a place for Jews to go in Palestine was very much attached to Jewish communities. They raised money for it. They led programs and trips, and many people went to live there. But that is changing. This war and the perpetration of what a lot of people call genocide, and I hate to bring it up now, but I guess it is a genocide. But the perpetration of that devastation, that intentional devastation of a people in Gaza and to a large degree in the West Bank, has really started to change the relationship between American Jews and Israel in a way that I believe marks a moment. And when I realized that, I went to one of my favorite novels, which is The Leopard by Giuseppe di Lampedusa from 1956. And a novel of the beginning of the end of the Sicilian aristocracy in the middle of the 19th century as Italy formed itself into a country and created the beginnings of a republic and then a democracy. But this novel, which is about an aging, a slowly aging aristocrat, Don Fabrizio, helped me understand what Partly Strong, Partly Broken was about. It helped me understand Rabbi Adina as a tragic figure living through and also navigating a really difficult moment where she's still holding on to old realities and old beliefs and old loves and desires in regard to Israel, but the world is changing. Just as the prince, the leopard, was to all the trappings of aristocratic Sicilian life. And that really helped me. And that was really, plugging into a greater literary consciousness there in a very concrete way, not a spiritual way, but in a concrete way, helped me to understand what my novel was about and really aided in setting me off to rewrite it.
I think you said earlier that you're already at work on your next book, or you have the concept for it. Are you working on it? Do you have the concept for it? Is it nonfiction or is it a novel?
Always, I have, there's a novel in a drawer that needs to be rewritten. That's about a photographer. And that's based upon an experience I had in Paris photographing. Um, and I don't know what will happen with that. I do have an idea for a kind of historical novel to take place in the last part of the 19th century into the 20th century with a dying um, or aging man who has lived through a very an extraordinary transformation of his world, but in the way in which he feels lost and shunted and pushed aside from it. Um, and I'm working on that in my head right now. But for the moment, I'm just taking notes or really just thinking, just letting ideas come to me. And
So
we'll see.
incubation phase.
Yeah, incubation phase. I'm still in the recovery phase from Partly Strong, Partly Broken, needing some rest and separation. And once I get that, maybe the ideas will start flowing with a little bit more precision. I have some good ones, I hope. We'll see where it goes.
So, to the aspiring novelist who's listening to our conversation, what's your best piece of writing advice, or what do you think you need to tell, a young or older novelist who isn't published yet but is working to build that skill and get a worthy manuscript completed? What's your best piece of advice?
To realize that the work of writing is work, and to take yourself seriously enough in a world that will not take what you're doing very seriously, but without taking yourself seriously, where you come to think you're all important and everything. Because writers tend to believe, and I'm certainly one of them, that every single thing we do is what matters most. There's like this intensification of attachment to our work that a lot of artists experience, I think, but writers experience a tremendous amount of rejection. It's built into the process. It has to be experienced. It will be experienced. And so you have to believe in yourself enough to overcome that. And at the same time, believe that you don't know everything and that all of this is about learning and community, learning from others, being in conversation with others, being open. I would say so I'm getting to the point. The point is don't hold too tightly to your work. That's all. In any way. In any way.
My guest has been Nathaniel Popkin. He is the author of the new novel, Partly Strong, Partly Broken. It is his fourth novel and his eighth book. Nathaniel, really appreciate you coming on the program, taking the time and giving us I don't think I've had a conversation like this one before. A novel completed, suddenly a global event happens, and the novel is recast to reflect that. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Mike. It was such a lovely conversation. Glad to talk to you anytime.